Well, welcome to the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. My name is Kimberly Jackson, as I already told you all before we came live, and I'm honored today to have you all in person for a really important event on advocacy that our team has been working on for a long time, at least Scott and I have, right? Yes. So on behalf, I want to thank the City of Seminole, the Florida League of Cities, and the Seminole Chamber of Commerce, and I have a long speech that my team gives me, so I have to make sure I get everyone. And want to make sure that we pay homage to our panelists, which we will do shortly, but to the dignitaries in the room, which we're so grateful to have so many of you all this evening. State Representative Linda Cheney, if you'd like to stand. Thank you so much for coming. We have Sherry Denham from the Governor's Office. If you're here and you kindly stand, very grateful for your presence. Josh Gable and Valerie Rayburn. Town of Reddington Beach Mayor David Will. Thank you so much. Seminole Vice Mayor Jim Oliver, Dr. Oliver, who has also been a part of this fund for some time now. Seminole City Council Member Trish Springer. Thank you so much. And Largo City Council Member Jamie Robinson, along with Seminole City Council Member Tom Barnhorn, and our very own Dr. Mark Strickland. Where's Mark Strickland? Provost. There he is. Thank you so much. So this program consists of two segments, which we do often. One is moderated, and that will be with Scott, which I will introduce formally in a moment. But the other one is audience questions and participation, which we welcome. If you see behind me, there should be a text that you do. You're going to text information to SPC Seminole 776 to 22333. And we can do that both virtually or if you're in person to submit your questions. We'll take them as we can. And of course, kindly don't be offended if we don't get to all the questions. We never do, but we try to. And we hope that our panel stays around long enough to answer some of your questions. And now it's time to get started. In the 2022 legislative session, the state of Florida allocated over $100 billion in altered laws that affected 22 million people, cities, businesses across the state of Florida. They will convene again on March 7th, 2023 to do the same. And we hope you will come away with this conversation with knowledge about how you can organize your civic group or like-minded people to successfully advocate for your priorities. In sum, after reading all that, that just means we want to make sure that we have effective advocacy. We want to make sure that you have a space to understand that your leaders are here to help you through that process. And we think it's important, particularly because we have an active leadership that comes home, that we utilize their skill set while they're here. So with that, we'll do our formal introductions. First, the senator. Senator Bill Galvano is a former member of the Florida Senate. He was elected to the Senate in 2012 and has represented Manatee, Charlotte, DeSoto, Glades, Hardy, Highlands, and Hillsborough counties. He served as the majority leader of the Senate for the 2014-2016 term, and then was chosen by his fellow senators to serve as the 88th president of the Florida Senate for the 2018-2020 term. Before being elected to the Senate, he served 8 years in the Florida House of Representatives. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Next to my right is Amanda Payne, who began her chamber career in her hometown community, and she grew up in a small town in Georgia, which she left at the age of 26 to see the world. I can resonate with that. I come from a small town too. Her adventures landed her in Morgantown, West Virginia, where she earned her executive MBA from West Virginia University. Does it go ears? She spent 10 years in West Virginia, where she worked to better her community and the state. And she currently serves as the president, CEO of Amplify Clearwater. She also served in the West Virginia House of Delegates for 3 consecutive terms, serving as the chair of the House Education Committee in her last term, and held the position of vice president and CFO of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much. Then I have Chris Stromberg next to me. And he joined the AFP-FL in 2019 after spending several years working in state government in Tallahassee, originally serving as the Deputy Director of Grassroots Operations and supervised local grassroots staff. He also transitioned to the policy team as a legislative liaison and is now the Legislative Affairs Director. In his role, he works closely with Senate legislators and their staff, state agency staff, and is a key voice in deciding which legislation to support or oppose. Thank you so much. And finally, Scott. Scott is the expert here tonight. He is the director of of field advocacy and federal affairs at the Florida League of Cities, where he has worked for more than 19 years. He oversees the grassroots and member advocacy efforts at the state and federal level for Florida's 411 municipalities. Scott is the proud father of 3 sons, ages 39, 36, 35, and he has 2 grandchildren, a beautiful 14-year-old granddaughter and a very active 8-year-old grandson. And from that, we're going to get started. Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for all being here tonight. Especially, I'm going to, just because I really believe it with all my heart, special shout out to all the elected officials and former elected officials, and for your public service. It's not easy work, and a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, and a lot of like, well, why'd you do that, and how did that come to be, and all that kind of stuff that happens when people are sitting home drinking their beer or having their wine at their table, and they get to second guess you a lot. So thank you all for your public service. For those that have done that, we really appreciate it at the League of Cities. The League represents 411 cities around the state. The style of government runs from strong mayors to what we call manager form of government, weak mayor, we don't like to say that, council member, manager form of government. We have policy committees that develop our legislative agenda. Each year we bring that to the legislature. We try to vet it with other groups like Americans for Prosperity and the chamber groups. And when I say vet it, we have ideas. We try to make sure that we understand the process well enough to know that nothing gets just introduced and suddenly it just happens. You have to go through, there's an awful lot of trimming and pruning and rearranging the furniture, et cetera, before something can happen. And my goal tonight is to try to pick you all's brain about how that works, how that happens. And I'm not the expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm surrounded by an awful lot of really smart people, and I think we're going to have a really good conversation. I'm looking forward to that tonight. And I guess I'd like to just start a little bit. Senator, I'm used to calling you Mr. President, so sorry if Senator Galvano, I'd like to start with you a little bit in terms of, tell us in terms of just what was it that got you started in the notion that you wanted to run for office? What did you see? Did you see a particular problem? Was there something that you felt needed fixing? Just kind of the background to that, because I think that helps us understand a little bit what makes people want to get engaged or not get engaged.
Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate being here, appreciate all of you being here, and again, as Scott said, the elected officials. And before I answer that, I do want to highlight what you said about nothing just happens. We have a saying in Tallahassee that there's no such thing as a coincidence, and that's the truth. And then you add to that what I learned when I first ran for office from Senator John McKay. He said, remember, politics is a full contact sport, and that's true as well. Well, for me, I grew up in a family of golf pros. My dad was a golf pro, and so I wasn't exposed to the political process as much, but I had a very patriotic mother and made sure we were involved in the community, and I eventually decided that I wanted to practice law here in the state of Florida, and I did go on to become a lawyer. And as part of my service as a lawyer, I got involved in community organizations, not just political organizations, everything from, Mote Marine Laboratory to American Cancer Society. And if you're community minded, you start to understand that we all have our own world, but there are worlds that other people live in that have issues that they have to face. And as I became more and more involved, I saw that there were some challenges that the state of Florida had it back in those days. We had tremendous problems with DCF that we've continued to work on for many, many years. We had just had the issues at Piney Point, the Alafaya River. And so there were definitely issues that motivated me to put my hat in the ring. But it's it's a decision you have to make in your heart to do, because it comes with challenges, sacrifice, and reward. You get to be part of a process that oftentimes most people can only try to influence through a letter to the editor or some other means. But yes, you will find that most politicians, the ones at least that I encountered, are good-hearted. They have recognized that they want to make a difference and are really striving to make a difference.
Great answer, and I want you to put a pin in that notion about the writing letters to the editor, because we're going to talk about effective advocacy, and that may or may not be a part of it. And so I want you to put a pin in that, and we'll come back to and visit that. So, and Amanda, thank you for your public service too. I didn't realize that you had served also in the House of Delegates in West Virginia. That's pretty cool. And so, was there something, some issue that prompted you to want to get engaged, and then and that made you decide to, once you were out, to sort of continue your journey in the political arena?
Well, first of all, thank you again for having us tonight. It's always a pleasure to get to talk about one of the things I love. I consider myself a policy geek, right? So I think, and that's part of the reason you're drawn to it. I was young. I hadn't even turned 30 yet when I decided to run for office, and it was really because of the changing of the landscape. West Virginia House of Delegates at the time had a multi-member district approach, which was unlike most other states in the nation. And as I looked at the names that began to line up for the seats that were available, they were names that had served in the 80s and the early 90s. And I thought, when I look around the legislature, I had the benefit of being able to lobby the legislature working for the West Virginia Chamber. And as I looked around those rooms, both bodies, I said, there's nobody in these rooms that look like me, right? And I said, we need somebody that's new, somebody that's fresh, that's thinking about our generation and my children's generation and what the policy we're making today affects them. And my boss, who was the president of the West Virginia Chamber, looked at me and he said, well, is somebody volunteering? And I actually said, there's no way in the world that I'm going to ever run for office. 2 weeks later, on the very last day that I could file to run, I decided that, back to your point, that it's a full contact sport. I can't sit on the sidelines and complain if I'm not willing to engage in the game. So that's ultimately what I did, and really had a wonderful time being able to shape and affect, particularly education policy. That's kind of near and dear to my heart.
Great. And before we move on, I just want to ask you, is there something, and I wanted to ask you this too, Senator, so we'll come back to you, in terms of once... A lot of people, when they're done, they walk away. And so what made you want to keep in this arena? And so I'll be asking you the same question. So
I don't know if the senator will agree with me, but I firmly believe that you can influence from the outside, maybe even and be more effective from the outside than you can from the inside. As we've stated already, you can't pass one thing alone, right? There's not one organization that can support something and get it passed. There's not one elected leader that can support an issue and get that passed. It has to be with collaboration, and particularly in my world, in the Chamber of Commerce world, we represent the voice of business. So when you collectively represent your larger business community, which is your employers, your employees, and how that affects kind of our economic ecosystem, we come with a pretty large voice, and we tend to get attention.
Great. Chris, you want to talk a little bit about what drew you to the process? How did you get involved, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Kim, and thank you so much, Scott, for having us. For me, I grew up in Tallahassee, in and around Tallahassee. My dad worked in state government. Both my parents had gone to law school prior to us moving to Tallahassee. So I really just kind of grew up around state government and knew that I wanted to be involved in it. Really from a very young age, I saw how much it influenced what went on, in Tallahassee, but also kind of understood that it affected people all across the state. So it was really always in the back of my mind. I went away for college. I say away from Tallahassee, down to Orlando at UCF, came back to FSU for law school, and then from there, actually worked. The Florida House of Representatives has an internship program. I applied for that my third year of law school. I was fortunate enough to work for the Rules Committee, which is like easily the best committee to work for, because you touch anything and everything that goes on, really. really the only office that touches more is the Speaker's office, because they determine everything that goes on in the House. So after that, I went back to the House, worked as an attorney for 5 years, moved over to the governor's office, focused on public safety, criminal justice, budget and policy for the governor's office for about 2 years. And then during that period, I met the lovely lady who would become my wife. She lived down here, so I said, I think it's about time for me to move on from Tallahassee, and I was fortunate enough to find Americans for Prosperity, and they allowed me to move down this neck of the woods. Got to stay involved. Fortunately, Americans for Prosperity builds communities across the state and across the nation, informing our communities what's going on in the political sphere, and then helping them advocate for themselves and for all the people of the given state, or really across the nation. So I supervised some of our engagement directors who lead the individual communities for about 2 years, and then about a year ago I transitioned full-time to lobbying for Americans for Prosperity Florida.
And he's quite effective at it, I might add. So, and
Thank
Senator,
you.
to go back to you just to ask the same question in terms of what made you not walk away. You're still involved, you're still engaged, and so what kept you there?
Well, and I would agree with Amanda's answer as well. I think once you've been part of the process, you get into the process maybe for 1, 2, maybe 3 issues, and you generally know the overreaching issues that most first-timers run on. But once you're there, it's like the ultimate backstage pass. You get to see what's going on. You know, I was a former rules chair, and you're absolutely right. That's a lot of bill traffic through there, and you can't just walk away from that knowing that the work's never done. The best you can hope for in a political role is incremental positive change. You know, reform lasts forever, and we're just speaking for myself, just a small part in a long history of great institutions. And so on the outside, there's a lot that you can do to continue to be influential in shaping the way we run the state and the way we run communities and ultimately this nation.
Great. That's a great answer, and I'm gonna jump right off of that. And Amanda, ask you and work this way this time in terms of when Senator Galvano just talked about things that we can do, keeping engaged, all that. How do you not just you, but get your members? How do you get, because we're here to talk about advocacy, and this is where the rubber meets the road, so let's talk about advocacy. And so in terms of effectuating this change, Senator Galvano talked about incrementalism and just kind of trying to move the ball down the court a little bit at a time. Talk to us about how you, in your role with the Amplify group, what you guys do, how you get your members engaged. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, and for us, it's finding that sweet spot. You know, most small business owners, they're just trying to keep the lights on, the paychecks, able to, make the next payroll, that kind of thing. So I really see it as our role as their Chamber of Commerce to stand in the gap. So we are there to kind of monitor policy, to be that advocate for them, to recognize when we might need to play defense instead of offense. And our members rely on us for that. So they really turn to us when there's a challenge. And getting that small business owner engaged in policy, a lot of times they don't understand how policy actually affects their bottom line. So to some degree, it's an education process. And, well, if this bill passes, this is ultimately what happens, or this is what needs to get changed, and in order to change it, this is what the policy looks like. So for us, it's a constant education piece to our small business owners and how what happens in Tallahassee, and in a lot of cases, even at our county and city level, affects the way that they do business and the way that they operate. But also balancing that with the fact that knowing that that's not their top priority. Their top priority is making the next payroll, right? So we engage in a variety of ways. We have regular committee meetings. We ask our members what their issues are. We shape our policy agenda every year based on those responses. And then during the legislative session, we have weekly updates. So we've engaged a lobbying team in Tallahassee, which is an extended arm of our team, and they're absolutely fantastic. They have wonderful relationships at the Capitol. We visit Tallahassee at least once during session, if not twice. Certainly we try during committee week and then during legislative session. And we get FaceTime one-on-one with our leaders, and we take our members with us to those meetings as well. So I think it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for an organization like ours. There's a variety of ways to get them engaged, and it's finding those ways that they can really plug in.
Great. And Chris, I'd like to ask you the same question, and Senator, I'm going to ask you the same, but I also, as you're answering, perhaps we could add, so you talked about your members that want that from you. So I know with the League of Cities, we have 2,500 elected officials. Unfortunately, I would say not all of them are involved in helping us with our legislative agenda. So talk a little bit about sort of how many people, and I know your organizations are a little bit different. I know probably if you join Americans for Prosperity, it's a different level of expectation in terms of what you're going to be getting from it versus if you're in the chamber versus if you've got corporate clients or whatever in terms of all that. So let's talk about a little bit about that as we're going along, and I'll come back to you, Amanda. But Chris, if you want to jump in there, and then Senator.
Sure. So really, we do a lot of the same things that Amanda talked about, but really just for individual citizens who want to get involved. We're one of the few organizations that we're on the ground as a citizens grassroots organization 24/7, 365 days a year. So, come November, I think it's November 9th is the day after the elections.
Mercifully.
Yes. Okay. So November 9th is that Wednesday. There are a lot of organizations that are similar to ours that cut probably 90% of our staff. We don't do that. Basically, all the staff that we have now is going to stay. I think we're actually probably going to continue to expand. But we are in our communities every day of every year, speaking with the community members, bringing them into our events, educating them on what's going on, talking about where we see Florida going and how we can continue to keep Florida as a great state of freedom and liberty and increase people's ability to make choices that benefit them and really live their lives. So we're committed to that. We have events really all across the state. Any given day, we have at least one event going on. Pretty much, whether it's some days it's phone banks. So we might have a lunchtime phone bank in South Central Florida on like a Thursday midday. Friday evening, one of our guys down in Miami might have a cigars and policy event with some of his veterans. He focuses on one of them focuses on veterans outreach down there. We've got folks up in Jacksonville. Right now, a lot of our folks are focusing on action, so we're out knocking doors, organizing our volunteers for phone banking, door knocking, etc. But once we get past that, it goes into education mode, and then, like Amanda said, once we hit session, I'm just one member of our team that lobbies up in Tallahassee, so we're up there speaking with lawmakers during committee weeks, all of session. So I essentially live in Tallahassee for about 5 months out of the year. And then our community engagement directors bring up some of their folks to Tallahassee during various different weeks to meet with their legislators and to actually see the process go on and participate with us. So we'll educate them about the bills that we're supporting. We typically try to plug them in with a bill that really affects their community or their community specifically is kind of focused on, and bring them to those meetings so that they can, voice their support for that bill and get involved in the process that way. And we talk them through how they can continue to follow the bill even afterwards through a variety of channels, whether it's watching the committee meetings on the Florida channel or using the Florida Senate website to actually track bills as they move through the process to see when amendments are filed, when the bill's up for hearing, and what's actually going on, who's voting for the bill, who's against the bill, and where their specific representatives might stand.
Thank you. That's a really good answer, Senator. I know you're still involved in the process, and I don't know how many like association type groups you're working with versus, because we have it's a really interesting mix that we have up here on this panel. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of that.
So as I sit here today, I'm a private business owner. That's what I am officially. I have almost 20 years of experience, though, with dealing with organizations like the ones that are represented here on this panel. And let me say, they're very effective. Each of your organizations are very effective. And I'm not just saying that. I can give you examples for each one throughout the years. But, you know, I still try to stay involved. I have clients and others that I interact with, and I recommend if, you know, they have industries that have issues that they want to take up, that they look for those advocacy groups that can help carry their message, or on an individual basis. I found in being in my roles that oftentimes your average private citizen, or resident as we say here in Florida, does not realize how accessible politicians are, and that we want to hear from you. We're one of you, and that's something people need to know, and understanding the process. I don't care if you know all you do is read books all day. At least know what the process is and how it works. And a great point was made about shutting down after Election Day. The most effective I found are the folks who were coming around during the downtime. You know, right now, if you're going out to see a politician and it's going into October, you'll probably get 5 minutes and pass a check over. That's the reality. It's the time when they can concentrate and absorb what the issues are, or get a perspective that they may be missing during the interim period.
Great, Senator. So you talked about, you mentioned year-round, doing it year-round. So I think you probably run into some of the same issues that I do with my membership and it seems, Chris, tell me if I'm wrong, correct me on this, help me understand Americans for Prosperity better. So I've always imagined them as an organization that people basically join in order to be advocates, essentially. Is that largely?
So joining is a little. I mean, everybody that comes with us is a volunteer and an activist. There's no sort of like fee. We don't make anybody sign a pledge. You know, really, honestly, almost all of our events are fully open to the public, and it's our staff, in various cities around the state, basically finding people that they know, going out and talking to groups that might have an alignment with us on whatever issue. And I mean, we cover a really broad range of issues.
Yes, you do.
From, you know, economic issues to criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, and we strike we're a nonpartisan organization, so we work with a lot of groups that you really wouldn't expect to come together, you know, across the nation. We've filed lawsuits in the Supreme Court with the ACLU, which I think if you know a little bit about Americans for Prosperity, we're considered a little bit more conservative, and I don't think you can get much more left-leaning than the ACLU, a lot of people would consider, but we've worked together on some lawsuits there, but you know, we've worked together on criminal justice reform with groups from both sides too, so.
Great. So following up with that, Amanda, so talk a little bit about get your member engagement. How do you get them? Because they're running businesses, they're doing a bunch of other stuff, and they may join the chamber, I would think, for being as part of their advocacy in terms of that you're going to go advocate on their behalf. But how do you get them engaged? How do you year round? How do you keep them involved? And what are their expectations from you all on that?
Well, you know, a lot of people join the chamber for a variety of reasons. I like to think that the advocacy piece is just a nice bonus for them, because I will be honest, a small business owner most likely doesn't join the chamber thinking they're going to be my advocates in Tallahassee. They're thinking, I want more customers, I want to drive recognition, I want to be printed in their visitor guide. There's a long list of things seen on their website, those things. Because, as chambers, we are able, to Senator Galvana's point, we are able to put our members in a room with people that otherwise they may not have access to, right? We have a PAC, we have a political action committee under our organization. We do endorse candidates. We host events with those candidates. Our mayor is very involved, and our city council members are very involved with our organization. So, being able to put the average business owner that may not even really know who our mayor is in the same room with our mayor, and that face-to-face opportunity makes a big difference in kind of their interaction in the community and them feeling like they're actually a part and plugged into our community. So I like to say that the advocacy piece truly is just a bonus to the fact that we really are there to be that advocate in every step of their business, not just in policy, but how can we help them with promotion and growth and creating more jobs and really investing back into our economy.
Great. Following up on it, now that we're kind of diving deeply into the advocacy piece, let's really break this down a little bit in terms of, Senator, when you were Senate President, you had a lot of different people coming to you, either mailing you wood blocks or as the home builders once did, or lots of different approaches. Help us understand what works, what doesn't work, what's effective, what's not effective, and the same question's coming for you. What are you guys feeling in terms of what really has worked or what hasn't, and what's the best way we can help the people participating here tonight be better advocates?
Well, first of all, I've been mailed some things a lot worse than wood blocks, believe me, that had to be confiscated by the sergeant. Usually they had a very pleasant message to go along with them. I think what has worked, at least in my world, are the folks who understand the process, know the timing of when to get in there, know whether it's committee hearings, when session's going to start, where you are in the budget process. The more knowledgeable advocates that have come to Tallahassee, they're already at an advantage because they know where to plug in. Also, I found that those folks who engage with staff, that recognize the value of political staff and realize that for the most part, they make much of what happens in Tallahassee happen. And a lot of those staff folks have institutional knowledge way beyond that of the term-limited member. And then those who are succinct in their message, hone it in, come in, know what they need to say, recognize that we're working on a 6-minute interval. Sometimes, we would have 40, 50 meetings in a matter of 48 hours or 24 hours. I mean, together with trying to manage all the committee hearings and things of that nature. And then the ones that are just up front. And, the idea of ambushing or attacking or that really never worked, at least it didn't with me. The ones who shared the real view and understood that every member of the Senate, every member of the House, and everybody who's on the plaza level, meaning the governor's executive branch, are also advocates. We are all advocating at the same time you are to our colleagues and to our other branches, and in many ways our job is the same as an outside advocate, but we're happen to be in the inside, and so that recognition helps too. And that the last thing I'd say is build those relationships early. Don't wait till someone's majority leader, rules chair, or whatever. Help that freshman House member, that friend of yours from the neighborhood that you think has a good mind and good heart who's running for Senate. Build those relationships, because those long-term relationships are going to and this may sound vulgar to say pay dividends in the future, but you know what I mean. I'm saying it will help you be able to have that access and be able to share your ideas in the future because there's a trust that has been developed.
That's a great answer, Senator. I was hoping you were going to mention letters to the editors again. I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on that in terms of do they work or not?
Well, I would never dismiss a letter to the editor. I think they have an effect. And, there's a great story about Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to the editor one time, and as a result found himself on the cusp of a duel. And so he created a rule where if he wrote a angry letter, he'd leave it in his desk for 24 hours. Of course, you can't do that with email. No, I think they're effective. I think if you're taking the time, especially if it's in your local paper, it's one of your constituents, it gets shared. People look at those, the media, and look at the periodicals and comb it for us. Even as a presiding officer, I'd get a media staff report, and if there was something on a particular issue, it would get brought to my attention. As I would just say this from personal preference, as long as it's thoughtful and it's advisory in nature and not just a rant.
Great answer. Manny, you want to talk about it? And Chris, we'll be asking you really specifically, like, what's working with your organization in terms of effective advocacy? How are you getting people to get engaged, stay engaged, and how are you getting your message delivered most effectively?
So, I think for us, and I'll tell you that we are a unique chamber of commerce in the nation, and that we do have a political action committee. There's a lot of chambers around the nation that choose not to engage in the political scene, and they are very neutral. In my mind, I think a PAC, if used correctly, is a very strong tool. And it allows us to not only get to know all of the candidates that are running and we endorse from school board, county commission, city council, and then state and house races. And so it allows us to get to know all of those candidates on a much deeper level and understand their positions on issues. And we have a candidate questionnaire, and we go through and interview every single candidate. And then this committee makes decisions on who is the best candidate to support from a business perspective. It is nonpartisan. It is pro-business. Are you going to be the best advocate for economic development in our community and our state? And so I think that having a PAC is incredibly effective if used correctly and it is well thought out. It can also be a double-edged sword if it is not. So, and I think always having that opportunity to defend yourself on your endorsements too. Trust me, I found myself on the hot seat more than one occasion where I had to defend an endorsement that may not have been what either a local leader may have thought should have been the right endorsement, or may not, or some of our members didn't agree with because another friend was running in a race, that kind of thing. But really having that backup to say this is why they're the best pro-business candidate, and we do that in forms of the questionnaires and the interviews. But I also have the unique perspective of sitting on both sides of the table, right? So we host a pre and post legislative event for our membership. I recognize from my time in office that if you came to talk to me in Tallahassee, or if you had come to talk to me in Tallahassee had I been there, or in Charleston when I was in West Virginia, you had limited amount of time, right? I mean, it was a very short time frame that you had my attention, and to the senator's remarks, you're running through them all back to back and keeping up with who you've seen that day, what they said to you, what their top issues were. I learned that a very succinct leave behind is very important. Make it very short, very sweet. Don't hand me something that's in a notebook with 15 pages or 40 pages, because I'm never going to get there. Hand me something that's a couple of pages with bullet points that helps me remember and recall our conversation and what's most important to you. And also, having that pre-legislative event allows us as a membership in an organization and a community to share with our leaders before they go to Tallahassee what's important to the business community and our hope and expectations for the session. And then following the session, we're able to kind of have a recap and evaluate, what we just discussed before versus what actually happened and kind of where we go next.
Great. And Chris, talk some about for your group what's effective, what's working, what's
absolutely. I mean, honestly, I would reemphasize everything that President Galvano said and that Amanda said. The other thing that we've found is incredibly impactful for advocacy is just have personal stories. Find people who are actually personally affected by whatever this policy is. And do everything in your power to bring them face to face with the members, because that story is, like the president said, the legislators are people, and that story, if it moves you, it's probably going to move that legislator. And really that's what gets things done. You know, I can talk until I'm blue in the face, but I get paid to do that. I would get paid to go into his office and talk to him. I'd like to think I'm pretty good at my job and that I can make a difference. But that story makes all the difference in the world. You know, I could, like 10 of me could not do what one good story does for members in making a vote.
So those are great answers, and I would just add that for us at the League of Cities, what we tell our members is anecdotes aren't what it's about. It's facts. Like, don't say, oh, my neighbor down the street told me that her uncle's Joe, blah, blah. Not effective. Having a real story, if you've heard that story, go find out the real source of it. What's the real? And don't talk about the sky is falling, because the sky isn't necessarily always falling. Sometimes it may actually be falling, but you got to pick your battles. Understand that hyperbole is not really the best approach to things. Trying to be calm, rational. We heard several, and I'm just going to repeat. And then what's that? I'm going to add something. Okay, great. So we talked about knowing when to plug in. That was really good advice, because we get people asking all the time, well, can't you do something about it? Well, that bill was passed last year. Yeah, we can do something about it, but you realize there's a whole process now that has to take. Being solution-oriented, building relationships, succinctness. I think every member of the panel has mentioned being succinct, solution-oriented, personal stories. Those are just some really important kind of key takeaways when it comes to advocacy, and I'll let you, Senator.
Yeah, I was just in concurring with you, and leave the flattery at the door. You know I'm not the best politician since Winston Churchill, and I don't look like John F. Kennedy, but you'd be surprised how many people, you all know that is, we're people, just like Chris reiterated, we want to hear the truth, we want to hear where it's coming from, we want to hear something from the heart.
That's an excellent point, and that goes along with the being truthful, and not making up stories. Anecdotes don't work. And I guess the one thing that hasn't been mentioned is making the ask, making sure. I've walked out of meetings with my members before, and they go, "That was a great meeting." I'm like, we don't know his position any more now than we did when we walked in that office. So it wasn't a great meeting. They were able to dodge and weave and avoid answering the question as to, we don't know whether that person's voting for that issue or not voting for that issue. And so as advocates, you need to know if somebody's with you, leave them alone, shore them up at the last minute if you need to, but you don't need to keep selling ice to the person that's holding the ice bag. Like, you need to move on and find somebody else to go work on. And so recognizing that, making the ask, and knowing what you said, Senator, about knowing when to plug in and when not to plug in.
Thank you so much. I always hate this part because we have to leave time for you all, and we want to hear from you, because that's the whole reason why we do what we do at the Institute. I want to reiterate what you all said, which are emphasizing issues that we face collectively, being a part of the community process, and just everyday organizations and advocacy, which I think means so much to our community collectively. Having new voices at the table always changes the impact of the conversation. Being more effective from what a business needs and wants, but also the specific understanding of grassroots organizations and when it's impactful and when it's not. These are all issues that when you're talking to leaders, they say, I had a great meeting with a young person who came in, and at the end, I still don't know what they want from me. Not just what the issues are, but I don't know what the ask is. I don't know how to help them deliver. I don't have data and facts. So one of the questions that was pre-submitted, and then we would like to open it up and we hope you have questions. One of the questions was, in this very passionate environment where people have very strong feelings, what is your advice to getting your positions across, knowing that it's important to moderate your tone as well? And I'll just have all of you all go, and then we'll offer the audience, if you'll just stand, because you're not mic'd, we'll have you just come stand and we'll have you answer your questions.
Well, I would really go back to something that I think the president said, of just don't be inflammatory when you are when you're telling the story or making the ask, I think a lot of people can get very inflamed and impassioned, and sometimes you kind of accidentally go for the jugular, if you will. But really kind of have your plan and have a logical ask at the end, and don't just go accusing people of being fascists or communists, because as soon as you use a term like that, if you're paying attention, you see people's eyes glaze over, and they've just tuned you out for the rest of that meeting.
I couldn't agree more. I think, the thing that makes America so great is that we are all so unique and so diverse, and we have different backgrounds and different thought processes, and you may be a conservative or you may be a liberal, but we can come together, to your point, on certain issues, and I think that's what's made our country great, and it's built the country that we have today. So I think recognizing that every conversation around this, whether it be with your neighbor or whether it be with your elected leader, always coming to it with an open mind and understanding that while you might be different on this particular topic or issue, there's another that you're going to align very closely on, and understanding that in collaboration you reach compromise, right? And that you may not always get everything that you want, but there is always opportunity for compromise, and it ends up best for everybody.
I agree with both those answers. They're exactly right on. And I think it's okay to say you disagree, but like was said, don't make it inflammatory. The only thing I'd add to that is that I've seen many times in my career, angry people will beat up on staff. Never beat up on staff. That's the worst thing you could do if you're trying to get something done in Tallahassee, because you're basically locking your own door. So if you do have to get something off your chest, wait till you're with the senator or the House member or whoever. But the people who work in Tallahassee, that's the one thing that bothers a lot of people when the staff gets beat up on.
And
Yes.
if I could, real fast, I agree, great answers on that. I'd like to just real quick find where you can agree. There's a 1,000-page bill. If you agree on 60 of those 1,000 pages, start there. Okay, we can do this, or we could tweak this, find out, and then kind of prioritize. You're not going to get everything. When you were Senate President, did you get everything you wanted? Nope. And if the Senate President doesn't get everything they want, or the House Speaker doesn't get everything they want, you're probably not going to get everything that you want. So go into it recognizing that it is a game of give and take, and you've got to know what's your crumble point? What is it that you absolutely cannot put up with versus, okay, we don't love that, but we can probably deal with that. Be solution-oriented when you're talking to legislators or even other lobbyists. Don't just go in and say, well, here's our problem. Well, how do you want to fix it? Well, I don't know. We just can't do this. That's a terrible response. Be solution-oriented. And when we go to meetings together, we've had some disagreements on some policy issues, but we both go in with solutions, trying to figure out what's the best way to try to, all right, how can we get what you want and what I want? And sometimes you can't. And then play the long game. We've had legislators that vote against us 99% of the time, but you know what? That 1% of the time that they vote with us, it's a really important measure. This year there was a bill sponsored by a legislator that we don't agree that often. It returned authority to local governments for smoking in parks. It was the right thing to do. That legislator, we don't see eye to eye often. He's a great legislator. We just don't happen to, policy-wise, we don't tend to mesh often. But you know what? We play the long game with him. He's our friend regardless. We never know when we're going to be able to have that opportunity to work with him. And so you always have to go in what you talked about, not being divisive and not calling somebody a communist or a fascist or whatever. That's silly talk. And you just can't do that. It's always the long game. You have to play that always. And then finally, just making sure that you're understanding the process. And you heard Senator Galvano talk about that in terms of knowing when to plug in and when not to.
Thank you. We are very also mindful that we have students here, and some of them are young students. This question is very specific about how to initiate and successfully submit a petition, how to determine the signature requirements, the number, the type, criteria. I know we have some young people in here who just want to understand the basic part of the process. If you had something to add to that part of the conversation, what could you add value for our SBC students and any of the students following us for the Florida college system?
So for like constitutional amendment petitions,
Yes.
is that what we're talking about? Okay. My recommendation, honestly, would be to go on the Florida Department of State website. The Division of Elections has a handbook that talks about the petition process and lays out all of the requirements there on the website. You can download the PDF. That would be my best recommendation. Is go through that, read through that, and then, if you have questions, like either call your local supervisor of elections or call the Division of Elections at the Department of State, and try to connect with them.
If I could add something on that. So great start in terms of understanding the process. It always helps to understand the process. But the other questions you have to ask is what is it that you want to try to accomplish, and will the thing that you're trying to do actually accomplish that? You see these groups that go, I'll use the example of the Medical Association with tort liability issues. They basically ran a constitutional amendment about changing tort, and then all that happened was the attorneys basically had a form that you have to fill out to say, I'm going to operate outside of that process. So they spent, $6 or $8 million on a constitutional amendment that did nothing. It didn't change the dynamics at all. And so making sure that what you're trying to accomplish can actually be fully accomplished, and that it is the right solution with not very much, not ways to get around it. And Senator, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this too. So.
Yeah, there have been a lot of successful petition campaigns in the state of Florida. You should keep up with it because it's a moving target. It literally moves based on the number of voters who turn out in the prior elections as to create the thresholds, but the law around it changes too. I would just add two things. A, make sure what you're asking for can be a constitutional amendment, that it's a single subject and it's a very direct and great point that Scott made. And then also, before you go down that journey, maybe talk to your House member or your senator. Talk to someone before you take on an endeavor that is really quite Herculean in nature, especially if it's a true grassroots petition, because the reality is that most of these today are well-funded by third-party groups and are self-interest petitions that become quite controversial.
And I'm going to add, as an educator, I totally agree with everything that's been said. Educate yourself. And you will be surprised at how many questions people get are formal, but if you just go and just have a conversation, most seasoned people are happy to answer genuine questions where they're mentoring someone and they're sharing knowledge. In fact, they're usually excited because it's the opposite of what happens in day-to-day life. So to the younger people who are very interested in getting in the process, find a mentor, spend quality time getting to know that person, and actually ask questions and listen to the responses. Or it's just basic advice. I know that we're going to wrap up soon, but I want to make sure if there are any questions, because we don't have any other pre-submitted questions, will you just kindly just stand up and we'll address them? Yes, please, thank you. And if you don't mind coming forward. Coalition building. So for the purpose of our virtual audience, the question was about coalition building. So thank you.
So I'm so glad you asked that question. Great question. As a member of the legislature, when you saw two organizations working together, it was more powerful. If you saw three of them, I remember being on the insurance committee in the House, and we had a single message from the trial attorneys, the chiropractors, and the Florida Medical Association. And I said, if these three entities that can't get along to save their lives all agree on a single issue, it must be a good policy issue. And so if in an organization, they can speak to this, I would think any time you have common ground and you could join forces, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I'm reading more questions I'm receiving from our team.
Real quickly on coalition. So I fully agree in terms of trying to build them. It's a little trickier than it sounds sometimes, in that sometimes you build a coalition with a group that isn't willing to say, all right, we're going to win 50% of what we want, and they say, no, we're going to take no prisoners, and the coalition falls apart, and you end up wearing a lot of egg on your face. So making sure that you go in to the coalition with a full understanding that each group has, that you're agreeing on the field that you're playing on, and what you can and can't agree on, and where you can move forward and where you can't, because it's great that they stuck together with their message, the chiropractors, the FMA, and the attorneys. If it starts to fall apart, it's failed, and it gets, probably the end result ends up even worse than what you anticipated, because a fractured group is not really all that successful. So making sure when you get into a coalition that it's the right coalition, that you understand fully what everybody is expecting out of that end result.
Are there any other questions? Yes, thank you.
What can we do about bills that preempt home rule?
Who's taking that on?
Sure. Since you asked. So the League of Cities, obviously, one of our primary issues is that we try to fight the unfunded mandates and preemptions. And frankly, the reason that we're against fighting that we try to fight preemptions is that we believe that it dilutes the ability of the average citizen to have a say in what's going on in their own community. Tampa is not the same as Tamarack. Key West is not the same as Key Colony Beach. There's different cities have a different personality, a different mindset. They allow different things. I know I'm from the St. Pete area. I know that Bel Air is not the same as St. Pete Beach. They don't want to be the same. They have their own different communal things that they want it to look like, a unique personality. I mentioned Tavares. That's the seaplane capital of the country now. So what home rule is about local decision making. And it's about allowing citizens to have a say in what's going on in their own communities. What can we do about it? I think that what we need to be able to do about it is making sure this is not a knock on the media, so I don't mean it's going to sound like it, but I want to preface it by saying, so the media is covering the issue when the Senate president's fighting with the House Speaker, or the Senate president's fighting with the governor. They cover that stuff because that's like the highbrow issues, and a lot of the other important stuff that's happening in terms of for preemptions and things like that is all happening underneath the radar. And so what the League of Cities, we've actually undertaken an effort to try to educate more citizens, to allow them to know what's happening on a regular basis, because so many of the preemptions happen at this other level it's not headline stuff. And so to fight preemptions, it really requires you to, all these points that we talked about, being good advocates, tell personal stories, build relationships with legislators, be solution oriented. You can't just say, don't do that to us. Let's figure out a way, if there's a problem with what's happening in the regulatory scheme at the local level, let's figure out, maybe there is a statewide answer that makes some sense. But maybe the legislature, if they back out of it, maybe no one's going to regulate it, and they need to understand that. So there's a lot of different approaches to it, and really what we talked about in terms of just successful advocacy is what we can do about that, and joining in, understanding, paying attention, watching the news channels, like the Florida channel is something I think you should weigh in on regularly. So I think that's one approach. Go to the League of Cities website if you want to know what's being preempted. We have a long list. There's been 92 of them in the last decade where local citizens have had their voices taken away. And I'm going to let some of my cohorts on the panel talk about that too. So.
And as we're wrapping up, I want to make sure if anyone else has another question to please ask. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I think there's not really much I can add, but I think back to that coalition piece, right? In my personal opinion, a government closer to the people is your most truest form of government. So I believe a lot of decisions, the closer the people can be to those decisions, the better. But back to that coalition, you may find that the League of Cities the chamber is also aligned with that, right? So finding those like-minded people that truly do believe in home rule or whatever the issue may be that you're facing, and creating that coalition. And it may be unlikely, bedfellows, so to speak, but it's, we're much more effective if we band together.
If there are no other questions, I'd like you all to close before I wrap up. There is one other question. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is mainly a question that I sent. I think it was pre-sent when I did the form. I signed up online for this event. And I know that today we basically went over, how different sides we can kind of find a truce, mainly work on issues that we both, kind of have a need, mainly issues that we can both agree on and work through and kind of find a win for both of us. And I, on behalf of college students, this is a question that a lot of us are having, especially in the wake of the loan debt forgiveness. How do you think that, because both sides, one side is kind of, for student loan debt forgiveness, one side's for the other, mainly just because of political things and economic things, and I'm not going to go into it because that's a long discussion piece, but there's been talks of colleges and multiple universities in the wake of the student loan debt thing, raising their own prices to kind of help, or to kind of mainly offset the loan debt forgiveness, because a lot of them are taken by universities or, being paid because of that. How do you think that we can kind of reach a solution to help prevent colleges from raising their financial prices or costs in academics from making college too expensive, especially for those who have disability needs, those who have, I guess you could say, needs, and ultimately kind of reach a solution that, at first seems like it, that we can't find a truce for, but ultimately affects everyone in general?
That is a very good question that I don't know if everyone on this panel can answer, but and to your point, these questions become very complex, so we're going to give this another go at it.
That would have been a great question at the beginning of
Yes.
this, because it is very, very complex. I'll try to hit the high issues without getting into making a political speech. But what I'd say is I can see as a college student that it's more difficult to see the compromise that exists in politics today. And I can tell you my own experience, I've watched a lot of that erode. And, I give a lot of the blame to the way we communicate today, and the social media and the quick soundbite and the, the post. And then, I used to do a thing where we would, believe it or not, I'd get some nasty post, and I would actually call the person, and it's a completely different person and tone on the other end of the phone than you just read that called you the worst thing since the last hurricane. Just real quick on the Florida State College system, the university system. The mindset has been for many, many years, and will continue to be, not to raise tuition. We invest very heavily in our university and state college system. I chaired Edapropes for 4 years, and I watched in my last 2 years as Edapropes under leadership of President Negron. We increased by $1 billion. And because overriding the issue of loans or no loans is the idea that we want people to we want to see performance from the universities. We want people to get you in, educate you, get you out, and put you in the workforce, and we want you to have a good paying job and not to have debt. And I will end with a political statement. The way to prevent student loan debt is to make it affordable and to support education and make sure that it's efficient and effective.
Thank you. With that, I'm looking. Do you have your hand up, sir? No? Okay. With that, I think we're going to close. The Institute was created by Congressman Bill Young for this exact purpose, to have conversations that we may not walk away with a complete solution, but a better understanding of a topic and exploring why it matters. So we are honored here at St. Petersburg College to have the Institute be housed here, but for students, not just here, but across the Florida college system. And we have some other programs coming up next week and throughout the rest of the semester, and we hope that you'll join them. And we always welcome partners, allies from all walks of life who want to come and add to the conversation. So thank each of you all, and particularly thank you to the team that helped work on this for a year. This is our second program. We had a program in February, if you'd like to learn about the first program on this particular topic. With that, I'm going to tell our tech team to progress the slides. Our next program is next week, actually, is on the state of aging. Jeff Johnson actually sits on the board of ISPS. We are a direct service organization embedded in the college, so we have separate board members, and he's doing a program for AARP for us. And then the next slide. We're doing the business of art, and we'll be doing that at the Tarpon campus. The Tarpon equally has a beautiful campus, and if you've never been to our museum, it is absolutely fabulous. And the interconnection of business and art, I believe, is why a lot of people are moving down to our beautiful state, along with a lot of other reasons. And do we have one more slide? We do a great debate every year. And for our students, that is when St. Pete College students compete on a specific issue. And then at the end, the Institute would host the debate. Well, we're moving that to a grand debate. And so now we're going to be having some competition, some healthy competition with some other colleges. So we hope we make Dr. Williams proud, although ISPS does not have a dog in this fight. We're just hosting. And finally, we're doing the state of child welfare in Florida, where we're doing a program to talk about some of the wealth of issues. All of our programs, by the way, are virtual as well as being in person. So if you can't come for any reason, we welcome you to just flip on your Zoom. And I think we have one more slide. This last one is always just the ask, if you will. I am making a specific ask. Learn about us. We have made a considerable effort to pivot amid COVID and to try to make us more accessible to everyone. And I have a very young, talented team who is in the audience, and as you came in, and they're working hard to make sure that you understand how we're connecting with our leaders, our nonprofits, our lobbyists, and our community. And so thank you so much for your time, and we welcome you back. Thank you.